There is a question that quietly lives inside so many people. Why do I feel lost? Why, even when life looks stable from the outside, does something inside feel disconnected, anxious, uncertain, or empty? The answer is not that you are broken. It is not that you lack discipline. It is not that you failed to try hard enough. The root of feeling lost is often trauma, and trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is what happened inside you as a result of what happened to you. Many people think trauma must be dramatic abuse, violence, catastrophe. But trauma can be subtle. It can be the absence of being seen. It can be growing up in an environment where your emotions were inconvenient. It can be being praised for achievement, but ignored in vulnerability. It can be having to be the strong one, the good one, the easy one. When a child senses that their authentic feelings threaten connection, the child makes an unconscious choice. I will abandon myself in order to belong. That moment, repeated over time, becomes the root wound, because for a child, attachment is survival. If expressing anger risks rejection, the anger gets buried. If sadness is dismissed, sadness gets suppressed. If joy is too loud, joy becomes muted. The child learns to shapeshift, and that shapeshifting becomes a personality. Years later, you may be successful, responsible, dependable, and still feel lost. Because the life you built may not be built around who you truly are. It may be built around who you had to become to stay connected. The nervous system does not forget. When you had to suppress parts of yourself, your body stored that survival pattern. You may now overthink before speaking. You may struggle to set boundaries. You may feel guilt for resting. You may chase approval without realizing it. You may feel an undefined anxiety when you try to do something purely for yourself. That is not weakness. That is adaptation. But here is the paradox. The very adaptations that once protected you now keep you from feeling whole. Feeling lost in adulthood is often the grief of a self that was never allowed full expression. And the solution is not to find yourself somewhere out there. It is to gently return to the parts of you that were silenced. Healing begins with awareness, not judgment. When you notice people pleasing, don't shame it. Ask it what it is protecting. When you feel overwhelmed, don't call yourself dramatic. Ask your body what it learned long ago. The path out of feeling lost is not a straight line of achievement. It is a slow, compassionate reconnection with your inner experience. It means learning to tolerate the discomfort of authenticity. It means setting boundaries even when guilt arises. It means allowing anger without labeling yourself as bad. It means choosing rest without earning it. Most importantly, it means understanding this truth. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You adapted to survive. And now, as an adult, you have the capacity to choose differently. The lost feeling is not a sign that you have failed. It is a signal from your deeper self, asking to be reclaimed. When you stop fighting yourself, when you listen instead of judge, when you offer yourself the compassion you once needed, something shifts. You begin to feel less like a stranger in your own life. And that is not the discovery of a new self. It is the remembering of who you were before you had to hide. When people hear the word trauma, they often think of dramatic, visible events. Accidents, violence, abuse, catastrophe. While these experiences can certainly be traumatic, trauma itself is not defined solely by what happened on the outside. Trauma is defined by what happened on the inside. It is the imprint left on the nervous system, the emotional body, and the developing sense of self. When an experience overwhelms a person's capacity to cope, especially when there is not enough safety or support available at the time. Two individuals can go through the same external event and emerge with very different internal experiences. One may process it, integrate it, and move forward. The other may carry anxiety, shame, hypervigilance, or numbness for years. The difference is not weakness or strength. The difference lies in the internal meaning the event took on, the emotional support that was present or absent, and the adaptations the person had to develop in order to survive. For a child, trauma is particularly internal because children depend entirely on attachment figures for regulation and survival. If a child expresses fear and is met with calm reassurance, the nervous system learns safety. But if fear is dismissed, mocked, ignored, or punished, the child does not just feel afraid. The child learns that their fear is unacceptable. The experience becomes encoded not only as distress, but as shame about having distress. That internalization is where trauma takes root. Sometimes trauma is not about what was done, but about what was missing. The absence of emotional attunement, the absence of being seen and understood, the absence of consistent safety can shape the inner world just as powerfully as overt harm. A child who repeatedly feels unseen may conclude, My feelings don't matter. A child who is only valued for achievement may internalize, I am lovable only when I perform. These conclusions become unconscious beliefs that organize adult behavior. Because trauma is internal, its effects often persist long after the external situation is ended. The body continues to respond as if the original environment is still present. A raised voice may trigger panic. Silence may trigger abandonment fears. Criticism may trigger deep shame. These reactions can feel confusing or disproportionate, but they are not irrational. They are the nervous system replaying old survival strategies. Internal trauma also shapes identity. When certain emotions or needs were unsafe to express, they were pushed down. Over time, a person may lose conscious contact with anger, sadness, vulnerability, or even joy. The personality that forms is often an adaptation, the good child, the strong one, the caretaker. From the outside, this may look functional or even admirable. On the inside, it can feel like disconnection. Understanding trauma as internal shifts the focus from blame to compassion. Instead of asking, what is wrong with me? A more healing question becomes, what happened inside me that made this response necessary? This perspective acknowledges that symptoms such as anxiety, people-pleasing, emotional numbness, or perfectionism are not character flaws. They are intelligent adaptations to past environments where safety required adjustment. When trauma is recognized as an internal wound rather than simply an external event, healing also becomes an internal process. It involves restoring connection to the body, to emotions, and to the parts of the self that had to be suppressed. It requires patience, safety, and the gradual rebuilding of trust within oneself. Self-abandonment rarely begins as a conscious choice. It begins as a survival strategy in childhood, at a time when belonging is more important than authenticity. A child depends completely on caregivers not only for food and shelter, but for emotional regulation, safety, and identity formation. When connection feels uncertain or conditional, the child's nervous system makes a simple calculation. Attachment must be preserved at all costs. If being fully oneself threatens that attachment, then parts of the self are quietly sacrificed. Children are exquisitely sensitive to the emotional climate around them. They notice when a parent withdraws, becomes irritated, overwhelmed, or disappointed. Even without explicit messages, they absorb subtle cues. A sigh when they cry, a frown when they express anger, praise only when they achieve, silence when they share fear. These moments teach the child which emotions are welcome and which are risky. The risky emotions are not processed, they are suppressed. If a child learns that expressing sadness results in dismissal, you are too sensitive, the sadness does not disappear. Instead, the child learns to disconnect from it. If anger leads to punishment or rejection, anger becomes dangerous. If excitement is labeled as too much, joy is toned down. Over time, the child becomes skilled at scanning the environment and adjusting accordingly. They become what the situation requires. This is the beginning of self-abandonment, the gradual turning away from one, as authentic inner experience in order to maintain connection. It does not feel dramatic. It feels necessary. The child who becomes the peacemaker in a conflict-filled home is praised for maturity. The child who suppresses needs to avoid burdening stressed parents is labeled independent. The child who excels academically to secure approval is celebrated. Yet underneath these adaptations is a quiet message: who you naturally are is not entirely safe here. Because children cannot blame caregivers, their survival depends on believing their caregivers are reliable. They turn the blame inward. If connection feels unstable, the child assumes something is wrong with them. I am too emotional. I am too needy. I am not good enough. These beliefs become internal narratives that shape identity. Self-abandonment becomes normalized. As this pattern continues, the child becomes increasingly disconnected from internal signals. They may struggle to identify their own needs, preferences, or boundaries. Instead, they focus on external cues, what others expect, what will avoid conflict, what will earn approval. This external orientation often persists into adulthood. The adult may be competent, responsible, and caring, yet deeply unsure of who they are beneath their roles. Self-abandonment in childhood also affects the nervous system. When authentic expression is unsafe, the body learns to tighten, to inhibit impulses, to remain hyper-aware. This can show up later as chronic anxiety, difficulty setting boundaries, people-pleasing, or fear of disappointing others. The adult may feel exhausted from constantly adapting, but may not understand why rest feels undeserved, or why saying no triggers guilt. What began as an intelligent survival response becomes an automatic pattern. The person no longer consciously chooses to abandon themselves. It simply feels like the way relationships work. Connection still feels conditional. Authenticity still feels risky. The original fear of losing attachment remains embedded in the body. Understanding that self-abandonment begins in childhood reframes it from a flaw to an adaptation. It was not weakness, it was loyalty to connection. It was a child doing whatever was necessary to stay safe and loved in the only way they knew how. Human beings are remarkably adaptive. Especially in childhood, the mind and nervous system organize themselves around one central priority: survival through connection. When certain emotions, needs, or impulses threaten the connection, the child does not simply stop having them. Instead, the child develops strategies to manage them. Over time, these strategies solidify. What began as adaptation slowly becomes identity. A child who grows up in an unpredictable environment may become hyper-aware of other people's moods. They learn to scan facial expressions, tone shifts, and subtle changes in posture. This vigilance helps them anticipate conflict and avoid danger. Years later, that same vigilance may be labeled as empathy, sensitivity, or anxiety. The adult may feel responsible for everyone's emotional state, struggling to relax because their nervous system is always reading the room. Another child may learn that love is earned through achievement. If praise and warmth are given primarily when they perform well, they internalize a powerful equation: accomplishment equals worth. The adaptation is to strive, excel, and perfect. As an adult, this can look like ambition and discipline, yet beneath it may live a quiet fear of failure and a belief that rest must be justified. The drive is not purely passion. It is protection against rejection. Some children respond to emotional neglect by becoming self-sufficient beyond their years. They stop asking for help. They minimize their needs. They become low maintenance. This independence is admired, but it may have formed in an environment where vulnerability was not met with support. Later in life, intimacy can feel uncomfortable. Depending on others may feel unsafe. The personality appears strong and capable, yet it may be built on the suppression of natural dependency needs. Others adapt by becoming caretakers. In families where caregivers are overwhelmed, depressed, or emotionally immature, a child may step into the role of stabilizer. They soothe conflicts, manage siblings, or absorb stress that does not belong to them. This adaptation fosters responsibility and compassion, but it can also create adults who struggle to prioritize themselves. They may feel guilty receiving care, unsure how to exist without being needed. These patterns are rarely conscious choices. They are encoded through repeated experience. Neural pathways strengthen around whatever ensures belonging and reduces threat. The body reinforces what works. Over time, the adaptive response feels automatic and authentic. This is just who I am, the person believes, not recognizing that who I am was shaped under pressure. When adaptations become personality, they can be difficult to question because they are often rewarded. The perfectionist is praised, the caretaker is appreciated, the independent one is admired, the agreeable one is liked. The cost of these traits remains largely invisible: chronic stress, suppressed anger, difficulty identifying desires, fear of conflict, or a persistent sense of emptiness. The challenge in adulthood is that environments change, but the nervous system may not. The strategies that ensured safety in childhood may limit freedom later. Hypervigilance can turn into anxiety. Achievement-driven worth can lead to burnout. Self-sufficiency can block intimacy. Caretaking can become resentment. What once protected begins to confine. Recognizing that personality traits can originate as adaptations softens self-judgment. Instead of seeing anxiety, perfectionism, or people-pleasing as flaws, they can be understood as intelligent responses to earlier conditions. This awareness opens space for choice. When the adaptation is seen clearly, it no longer has to define identity. The person can begin to differentiate between who they truly are and who they had to become. Feeling lost is often described as confusion about direction, purpose, or identity. But beneath that confusion is usually something quieter and deeper: disconnection from the authentic self. It is not simply that you do not know what to do next. It is that you no longer feel anchored to who you truly are. The compass inside feels unreliable, not because it is broken, but because it has been ignored for a long time. Disconnection from the authentic self does not happen overnight. It develops gradually when external expectations become louder than internal signals. As children, we are naturally attuned to our feelings, curiosities, impulses, and boundaries. We know when we are tired, when we are hurt, when we are excited, when we do not like something. But if those signals are repeatedly dismissed, corrected, or overridden, we learn to doubt them. Over time, we stop listening. If love or approval felt conditional, authenticity may have felt risky. You might have learned to choose what was acceptable, rather than what was true. Perhaps you pursued the path that pleased your family instead of the one that energized you. Perhaps you became agreeable to avoid conflict. Perhaps you silenced opinions to maintain belonging. Each compromise may have seemed small, even reasonable, but layered together, they create distance from your inner voice. As adults, this disconnection often manifests as a persistent sense of emptiness or restlessness. You may accomplish goals yet feel strangely unfulfilled. You may be surrounded by people yet feel alone. You may change jobs, relationships, or environments hoping the lost feeling will disappear, only to find it returns. This is because the issue is not external location but internal alignment. When you are disconnected from your authentic self, decision-making becomes exhausting. Without access to genuine preference, every choice is filtered through "what should I do?" rather than "what feels right?" The nervous system may remain in a subtle state of tension, constantly scanning for cues about what others expect. The body's signals fatigue, excitement, discomfort are muted or mistrusted. You may struggle to identify what you truly enjoy or what you genuinely need. Disconnection also creates internal conflict. Parts of you may long for change, creativity, or rest, while other parts insist on responsibility, productivity, or compliance. Without awareness, the protective parts usually win because they were formed around survival. The result is a life that looks stable but feels misaligned. The lost feeling is the quiet protest of the self that has been sidelined. Importantly, feeling lost does not mean there is something inherently wrong with you. It often means that adaptation has overshadowed authenticity. The qualities that once helped you belong may now obscure who you are beneath them. The disorientation is not failure, it is feedback. It is an invitation to turn inward rather than outward for direction. Reconnection begins with small acts of noticing. What brings even slight energy? What drains you? What emotions arise when you imagine saying no? Where do you feel contraction in your body? And where do you feel openness? These subtle signals are fragments of the authentic self waiting to be acknowledged. The path out of feeling lost is rarely dramatic. If you approach these patterns with harsh judgment, you reinforce the message that parts of you are unacceptable. The body tightens. Defenses strengthen. Compassionate awareness softens that internal stance. It recognizes that even your most frustrating patterns were once intelligent adaptations. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior or staying stuck. It means understanding before attempting change. When you understand that your anger hides hurt, or that your perfectionism hides fear of rejection, the reaction loses some of its intensity. You begin to relate to yourself rather than battle yourself. This kind of awareness also involves slowing down enough to feel. Many people live primarily in their thoughts, analyzing and problem-solving, while avoiding the body's sensations. Healing requires reconnecting with the physical experience of emotion, the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the stomach, the heat in the face. These sensations are not obstacles, they are doorways. When you stay present with them gently, without forcing them away, they often begin to shift on their own. Compassionate awareness is not passive. It takes courage to remain with discomfort without numbing it or projecting it outward. It requires tolerating vulnerability and uncertainty. But this presence builds internal safety. The nervous system learns that emotions can be felt without catastrophe. Gradually, the intensity of triggers decreases because the body no longer needs to defend against feelings that are welcomed. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. Instead of defining yourself by your symptoms, "I am anxious, I am broken, I am too sensitive," you begin to see yourself as the observer of these experiences. There is space between you and the pattern. In that space, choice becomes possible. You can pause before reacting. You can respond rather than reflexively protect. Healing through compassionate awareness is less about becoming someone new and more about creating an internal environment where all parts of you are allowed to exist. When judgment softens, curiosity grows. When curiosity grows, understanding deepens. And when understanding deepens, change arises naturally, not from force, but from integration. In moments of deep dissatisfaction or feeling lost, the impulse is often to reinvent yourself, change the career, move to a new place, adopt a new identity. Create a dramatically improved version of who you think you should be. Reinvention feels powerful because it promises distance from pain. It suggests that if you can become someone different enough, you can escape the discomfort you carry. But lasting healing rarely comes from abandoning who you are and constructing a new persona. It comes from reconnection. Reinvention is often driven by the same survival patterns that created the disconnection in the first place. If you learn that you are only valuable when achieving, reinvention may look like setting bigger goals and pushing harder. If you learn that you must be likable to belong, reinvention may look like reshaping yourself to fit new social environments. These efforts can bring temporary excitement or validation, but they do not address the deeper separation from your authentic self. Reconnection asks a different question. Instead of who should I become? It asks, who did I have to stop being? Beneath coping strategies, beneath roles and expectations, there's the core self that once expressed emotions freely, that felt curiosity without self-consciousness, that knew instinctively what felt good or wrong. That self was not destroyed, it was adapted around. The path forward is not about constructing something entirely new, but about gently uncovering what has been buried. This process can feel unfamiliar because many people have spent years orienting outward. They look to external standards to determine worth, direction, and identity. Reconnection requires turning inward and listening to signals that may have been ignored for a long time. It means noticing what energizes you instead of what impresses others. It means honoring fatigue instead of overriding it. It means acknowledging anger as information rather than suppressing it to keep peace. Reconnection is also about restoring trust in your internal experience. When self-abandonment has been a long-standing pattern, self-trust erodes. You may second-guess your choices or doubt your perceptions. Each time you listen to your body, as cues and respond with respect, that trust begins to rebuild. Small acts matter, saying no when something feels wrong, speaking up when you disagree, resting when you are tired. These are not dramatic reinventions, they are quiet realignments. Importantly, reconnection does not mean rejecting growth. It means ensuring that growth emerges from authenticity rather than fear. Change that arises from reconnection feels different in the body. It carries less urgency and more steadiness. There is less desperation to prove and more willingness to explore. Decisions become guided by alignment rather than avoidance. The feeling of being lost often stems from living too far from your inner truth. Reinvention can temporarily distract from that emptiness, but it cannot resolve it. Reconnection addresses the root. As you begin to integrate the parts of yourself that were once silenced, your vulnerability, creativity, boundaries, desires, you may notice a subtle shift. Life feels less like performance and more like participation. The path forward is not about becoming extraordinary in someone else's eyes. It is about becoming honest in your own. When you reconnect with your authentic self, direction emerges not as a forced plan, but as a natural extension of who you are. And so if you find yourself feeling lost, confused, or disconnected, let that not be a verdict against you, but an invitation toward you. The emptiness is not proof that you have failed. It is evidence that something essential within you is asking to be heard. For years, you may have lived according to what was necessary, what was expected, what was safe. Now you have the opportunity to live according to what is true. You do not have to rebuild your life overnight. You do not have to have every answer. You only have to begin by listening, gently, patiently, honestly. Each time you choose awareness over avoidance, compassion over criticism, authenticity over approval, you take a step back toward yourself. The parts of you that adapted were never your enemies. They protected you. But you are no longer the child who had no choice. You are the adult who can create safety within. And from that safety, a different kind of life becomes possible. Not a perfect life, not a painless life, but a life that feels like it belongs to you. You are not here to become someone else. You are here to remember who you were before you had to hide, and to live from that place fully and unapologetically.